The town of Spring Creek, Montana, looked perfect under its blanket of snow. Neighbors waved politely, children laughed in the distance, and smoke curled lazily from chimneys. From the outside, the Hale household seemed just like any other. Tidy lawns, freshly painted shutters, and the kind of order that made outsiders admire its owners. But behind the locked windows, a hidden storm raged. 10-year-old Emily Hale flinched at every loud noise, every sudden footstep. Her stepfather, Victor, carried his respectability like a shield, church volunteer, the man everyone trusted. Yet in the shadows of the house, he was something else entirely. The girl's mother, Sandra, offered no protection, only a cold silence that pierced deeper than Victor's hands ever could. On a bitter winter night, after a punishment too cruel to remember clearly, Emily slipped out of the back door in nothing but her nightdress. Snow burned her bare feet. Streets that seemed so safe during the day became an endless maze of shadows and wind. She ran not knowing if she would make it, if she would ever be touched by kindness again. And then, a sound cut through the silence. A bark. A warm presence. A glimmer of hope in a frozen, unforgiving world. The morning sun in Spring Creek didn't rise. It crept. A pale light stretched across the snow, softening the world into white silence. To an outsider, this Montana town was the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. Church bells rang at 10. The bakery opened at 6. Children waved at passing trucks, and neighbors still shoveled each other's driveways. From a distance, everything felt pure, almost peaceful, like the whole town was caught inside a snow globe no one dared to shake. But Spring Creek had a way of hiding its secrets, and the Ross family home was one of them. The house stood near the end of Birchwood Lane, a 2-story colonial, freshly painted, curtains drawn just right, the front yard always trimmed to the inch. People called it the prettiest house on the block. They didn't see the girl who rarely came outside. They didn't see the faint shadow that sometimes appeared behind the upstairs window. Inside that window was Emily Ross, 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor, a small voice recorder clutched in her hand. It was one of those cheap plastic ones her teacher gave her for a class project. "Tell us about your family," she'd said with a smile. But Emily never brought it back. Now she whispered into it when no one was listening. "Today, I didn't say anything at breakfast. I didn't look at him. Mommy said that was rude. He smiled when I cried. I think he likes when I cry." A pause, then a faint breath. "I wish someone could hear me." Downstairs, the clatter of dishes broke her whisper. Her mother's voice, sharp and hollow, floated up the stairs. "Emily, come down now." The girl quickly tucked the recorder under a loose floorboard beneath her bed. She'd found that hiding place months ago, the same week the bruises started showing. She stood still for a moment, listening. Footsteps, then silence. Only when she was sure the coast was clear did she step out. The Ross family lived like clockwork. Victor Hale, Emily's stepfather, left for the office of Fatonville every morning at 7:30 sharp. He worked in insurance, wore polished shoes, and kept his smile wide enough to win anyone's trust. At church, he was the man who opened doors for old ladies, carried hymn books for children. "A real man of faith," the pastor once said. But faith, in the Ross household, was something Victor demanded, not practiced. When he came home, the air shifted. Even the walls seemed to shrink. Sandra Ross, Emily's mother, would set the table early, polish the silverware, light a candle. She called it keeping the peace. Emily called it the warning. That morning, everything looked perfect. Scrambled eggs, pressed napkins, Victor's favorite coffee mug. But he still noticed the mistake. A glass on the wrong side. He smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "you know how I like things." Sandra's hand trembled as she moved the glass. "Sorry, Victor." Emily stayed quiet, her small hands gripping the edge of her chair. She felt the way his gaze crawled over her, slow, heavy, patient. "Emily," he said, still smiling, "aren't you going to say grace?" Her voice barely came out. "Yes, sir." For a moment, no one breathed. The silence stretched so long it became a sound itself, the kind that fills your chest and makes it hard to swallow. Then Victor closed his eyes and began to pray. But Emily didn't listen. She stared at the snow falling outside the window. In that white, endless silence, she imagined a world where no one yelled, no one hit, and no one told her to smile when she didn't want to. After breakfast, she was sent upstairs again. "Homework," her mother said. But Emily didn't take out her books. She lifted the floorboard and pulled the recorder back out. She pressed play. The static crackled softly. Then her own voice returned, small, broken, trembling. "If I go missing, it's because I tried to run. I don't think Mommy will look for me." The tape clicked off. Emily pressed the recorder to her chest, eyes burning. It wasn't courage she felt. It was survival. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing everything in quiet perfection. Neighbors walked past with warm smiles and steaming coffee cups, never noticing the little girl at the window. At church that Sunday, Victor Hale shook the pastor's hand, laughing about the little angel at home who loved to draw. He spoke with the warmth of a father, the charm of a friend. And when someone asked about his wife, Sandra smiled too brightly and said, "We're blessed, truly blessed." But the truth was buried, like the recorder under the floorboards, waiting for someone to press play. And in the silence that followed, the narrator's voice would return, low, calm, cold. In this town, even the snow seemed afraid to fall too loudly. Night fell over Spring Creek like a blanket too heavy to breathe under. The snow outside had stopped, but the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was waiting, the kind of silence that listens. From the Ross house, light spilled through the curtains in sharp, golden slits, trembling slightly with every movement inside. Then, a sound, muffled at first, a man's voice rising, cut short by the sharp crack of breaking glass. A pause, then a whimper, then nothing. Behind that silence was a door, the one at the end of the narrow hallway, always closed, always forbidden. Behind it, 10-year-old Emily sat on the floor, her knees pulled tight to her chest, clutching a small teddy bear with one missing eye. The bear's fur was gray from years of being gripped too hard, too often. From beyond the door, Victor Hale's voice thundered again. The air trembled with each word. "You think this house runs itself?" Another crash, something fragile shattering. Maybe a cup, maybe a plate. Emily's breath came in sharp, frightened bursts. The girl's mother, Sandra, spoke softly, almost mechanically. "Victor, please." But the tone wasn't pleading. It was resigned, tired, as though she had repeated those words so many times they'd lost all meaning. And then came the sound Emily dreaded most. Footsteps. heavy, deliberate, growing closer. She pressed the teddy bear against her face, eyes squeezed shut. The door opened with a slow, deliberate creak. Victor stood in the doorway, his shadow stretching long across the floor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, the picture of a hard-working man, to anyone who didn't know Eder. But his eyes told another story. Cold, calculated. He stared down at the spilled milk beside Emily's small shoes, the white puddle spreading slowly across the wooden floorboards. "That's what this is about?" Sandra said quietly from the kitchen. Victor's reply was low, controlled, too controlled. "She needs to learn. Mistakes have consequences." Emily wanted to speak, to say sorry, but the words tangled in her throat. She only nodded, trembling, and then the sound. A slap. Sharp. Final. Her small hand flew to her cheek, already burning. Sandra turned away, her back rigid. She whispered almost to herself, "You made him angry again." Emily didn't cry. She never did anymore. Tears made things worse. The clock ticked somewhere in the living room. A slow, steady reminder of time passing in a house where nothing changed. Victor's breathing was heavy now. The rage had passed, leaving something colder behind. Indifference. He looked at Emily as though she were something broken, something less than human. Then, without a word, he walked out. His footsteps faded down the hall, then up the stairs. The bedroom door shut. Sandra remained. For a long moment she stood staring at the puddle of milk, as if unsure what to do next. Finally, she fetched a rag, cleaned the floor, and whispered, "Go to your room." Emily rose, silent as a shadow, her bare feet padding softly against the cold wood. Her cheek stung, but what hurt more was the echo of her mother's words. Not shouted, not cruel, but empty. In her room, Emily closed the door and turned off the light. The darkness didn't scare her anymore. Darkness couldn't yell. Darkness couldn't hit. On the small desk beside her bed, crayons lay scattered over pages of drawings. Dogs, dozens of them. German shepherds, golden retrievers, police dogs with badges. In her drawings they stood tall and proud, protecting children, stopping bad men, watching over families. Sometimes she drew herself next to them, smiling. Sometimes she gave the dogs names: Ranger, Scout, Hero. Names that sounded safe. Names that sounded kind. She picked up one of the drawings now, tracing a line over the shape of a German shepherd's face. The dog's eyes were large, warm, watching her. "If there's a heaven," she whispered, voice barely audible, "I hope dogs are the ones guarding it." The wind howled outside, rattling the window slightly. But inside the room everything was still. Downstairs, Victor turned off the lights. The house went dark, perfectly quiet again, as if nothing had happened. The snow began to fall once more, slow, delicate flakes landing on the windowsill. From a distance, the Ross house looked peaceful again, like something from a postcard. Golden light, perfect walls, a family asleep inside. But behind those locked windows, something else was happening. A little girl was teaching herself how to be invisible, how to disappear into silence. And in that silence she began to imagine voices, gentle, protective voices that said the words she'd never heard before. "You're safe. You're brave. You're loved." They weren't real, not yet. But one day, they would be. Because somewhere beyond this night, beyond the snow, beyond the walls that kept her pain hidden, something was coming for her. Something that would break through the silence. Something that would finally listen. The night began like any other. Too quiet, too heavy. In Spring Creek, the snow had not stopped for 3 days. Each flake fell slowly, soundlessly, as if afraid to disturb the world below. Inside the Ross house, that silence was deceptive. Behind the white curtains and the flicker of the fireplace, another storm was waiting to break. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her small fingers tracing circles in the wood grain. Dinner had been quiet, as usual. Victor at the head of the table, newspaper open, fork tapping rhythmically against his plate, Sandra sitting opposite, eyes unfocused, her mind somewhere far away. Then, the sound. The fragile clang of porcelain meeting tile. A plate slipped from Emily's shaking hands and shattered on the floor. The silence that followed was unbearable. Victor's chair scraped back. "Do you know what that cost?" His voice was calm, too calm. I'm sorry," Emily whispered. Her heart thudded so loud she could barely hear herself. Sandra's hand trembled as she reached for her glass of water. She didn't look up. "Don't make it worse," she murmured, voice almost invisible. But it was already too late. Victor rose slowly, towering over Emily. His breath reeked of whiskey. "You think sorry fixes everything?" His words were steady, deliberate. "You think this house runs on your apologies?" Emily backed away, step by step, until her shoulder hit the cold wall. She clutched the edge of her dress, fingers white. "I'll clean it," she whispered. "Please, I'll—" The rest of her words vanished under the sound of the first hit. A hand, open and hard, striking her across the face. Then another. The third blow sent her crashing to the floor. The world tilted. The fragments of the broken plate cut into her palm. Somewhere she could hear her own sobs, small and uneven, swallowed by the storm outside. Sandra turned away, facing the sink, whispering again to herself, "Don't make it worse. Don't make it worse." Her voice trembled like glass about to break. Victor's breathing grew heavier. The anger in his eyes had no target anymore. It was something he needed to release, and Emily was simply there. "Worthless," he muttered, pacing. "Always making me look bad. Always—" He stopped, looked down at her. Then, without another word, he left the kitchen, his footsteps thudding up the stairs. A door slammed. Silence returned. But it was not peace. Emily stayed on the floor for a long time, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The taste of blood lingered on her lip. She looked toward her mother, still turned away, shoulders shaking, hands gripping the counter. For a brief second, Sandra's mask slipped. A tear fell into the sink. Then she wiped it quickly, as if denying it ever existed. And Emily understood. No one was coming to help her. Not her mother. Not the neighbors. Not the church people who smiled on Sundays and called Victor a good man. She was utterly alone. Her small voice echoed inside her head. Cold, detached, older than her years. "Some nights," it whispered, "the only prayer left is to run." Outside, the wind howled softly, brushing against the window like a beckoning hand. The snow shimmered under the faint light of the street lamp. A white world, silent, endless, unknown. She waited. Upstairs, the sound of footsteps paced once, then stopped. A bottle clinked. A few minutes later, the floor creaked. Then nothing. The house began to breathe its heavy, drunken silence. Emily counted the seconds in her head. 100, 200, 300. When she was sure the monster was asleep, she rose from the floor. Her body ached, but something inside her had shifted. She felt it. Not courage exactly, but a breaking point. The kind that comes when fear burns itself out and leaves only the will to survive. She crept toward the back door, careful not to let the floorboards creak. The air smelled faintly of whiskey and wood smoke. At the kitchen counter, she saw the small teddy bear, its one eye glinting faintly in the dark. She picked it up and pressed it against her chest. Her mother's voice came from behind, faint, trembling. "Emily?" The girl froze. Sandra stood by the stairs, wrapped in her robe, eyes wide and empty. For a moment, neither moved. Then Sandra whispered, "Where are you going?" Emily didn't answer. She only looked back, a look that said everything. Sandra opened her mouth as if to speak, to stop her, but no words came. She just turned her face away, like always. Emily's hand reached for the doorknob. She turned it slowly. The door opened with a whisper of cold wind. Snow rushed in, biting, blinding, pure. It filled the room with white breath, as if the world outside was calling her name. Barefoot, trembling, she stepped out. The snow stung her skin, but she didn't stop. The door creaked shut behind her, muffling the last warmth of the house. She looked up at the sky, dark gray, heavy with clouds, and took her first step into the white void. Each step was pain, each breath a knife. But ahead of her, somewhere beyond the night, there was something that felt like hope. The wind carried her small whisper into the dark. "I just want to be free." The night had swallowed the town whole. Emily ran, not like a child, but like someone running from a fire that could think. The snow blurred the world into shades of gray, her thin nightgown whipping against her bruised legs. Barefoot, she stumbled through the empty streets of Spring Creek, each step cutting into the skin, feet like glass. Behind her, the house shrank into the distance. A perfect little home with white shutters, now nothing but a shadow behind the curtain of falling snow. Her breath came out in harsh, broken gasps. She couldn't tell if the sound chasing her was the wind or the echo of Victor's voice. "Come back here." She heard it in her head, over and over, even though the night was silent. The town slept, lights off, windows locked. She passed the bakery with its frosted windows, the church with its steeple dark against the storm, and the gas station where the neon sign flickered weakly, open 24 hours. But no one was there. No one ever was when you needed them most. Her fingers were numb now. She could no longer feel the small teddy bear clutched against her chest, its one remaining button eye staring blankly into the white night. Her hair was wet with snow and sweat sticking to her face. She turned down a side street, narrower, darker, and the world began to spin. The air felt thick, too heavy to breathe. Her knees buckled. She fell hard onto the frozen ground, skin scraping against the ice. A sharp pain shot through her palms and knees, but she didn't cry. There were no tears left to cry, The snow began to pile over her like a blanket. She crawled, just a few feet more, until her body gave out beside a row of dumpsters behind an old diner. The air smelled faintly of metal and cold grease. The sound of her breathing was shallow, fragile. For a moment, she thought of her mother, not as she was, empty, distant, but as she should have been. The warmth of a hug that never came, a lullaby that was never sung. Then her thoughts drifted to something else, something small and golden. A drawing she had made weeks ago. A dog standing in the snow, tail wagging, eyes kind. The kind of creature that would never lie, never hurt her, never leave. Her lips trembled as she whispered into the cold, "Please, anyone." Her voice was barely sound anymore, just breath carried by the wind. Nothing answered. The only reply was the slow fall of snow, the hush of the storm, pressing down on everything. Her heartbeat slowed. The edges of her vision turned soft, like a photograph fading in time. The bell from St. Mary's Church rang in the distance. Once, twice, midnight, and then something shifted. A low hum broke the silence. Faint at first, then closer. A police siren, its distant wail bending through the storm. The red-blue lights flickered faintly through the snow, turning the falling flakes into a haze of color. Emily tried to lift her head, but her body no longer obeyed. Her hands, small, pale, trembling, reached forward weakly. The siren grew louder, tires on snow, a car door slamming. Then, a sound that cut through everything. A bark, strong, sharp, alive. Her eyes flickered open. Somewhere in the blur, she saw a dark shape moving through the snow. 4 legs, fur gleaming under the red-blue flash. Another voice, a man's this time, calling out words she couldn't quite understand. The dog barked again, closer now. Its breath steamed in the cold, powerful and steady. Emily's vision dimmed, but she smiled faintly, the first time in what felt like years. Dogs don't lie. Her hand, small and shaking, reached out toward the sound. Her fingers brushed the air, as if trying to touch a promise that had finally come true. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man's footsteps quickened. "Hey, I got her!" he shouted. "Over here!" But Emily couldn't hear the rest. Her eyelids fluttered shut, her breath fading to a whisper. The warmth of the dog's fur brushed her fingers, just as the world went dark. Snow fell quietly over the alley, soft, endless, merciful. The siren echoed off the buildings. The dog barked again, a sound of urgency and life cutting through the cold silence. And for the first time, that sound did not frighten her. It sounded like hope. The storm had not let up. Snow fell like sheets of silence, covering everything. The sidewalks, the cars, even the street signs that pointed nowhere. Officer Daniel Cooper tightened his scarf and adjusted his patrol cap, his breath misting in the air. The night had been long, uneventful, the kind that numbs you with monotony. He rubbed his gloved hands together and glanced down at his partner. Rex, the German shepherd, was walking slightly ahead, ears pricked, tail low, alert but calm. A veteran K9, trained for search and rescue, drug detection, and tracking. But tonight, Daniel noticed something different. Rex stopped, head tilted, nose twitching. Then a low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled from his throat. Not a warning, but something deeper. Instinct. "What is it, boy?" Daniel asked, his voice muffled by the wind. Rex didn't wait. He pulled forward hard. The leash went taut. "Rex, easy, hey!" Daniel jogged to keep up as the dog veered sharply into a narrow alley between two shuttered buildings. Snow clung to the walls. The wind howled like a wounded thing. The flashlight beam cut through the flurry, trembling slightly in Daniel's gloved hand. He couldn't see much, only a blur of white and shadow. But Rex's behavior was unmistakable now. He was tracking something. "Rex!" The dog didn't stop. He barked once, sharp and urgent, the sound bouncing off the brick walls. And then Daniel saw it. A small shape crumpled beside a dumpster. Bare feet, pale skin against the snow. Jesus! He rushed forward, kneeling down, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't a woman. It was a child. Maybe 10. Maybe younger. Her face was half buried in the snow. Her hair matted, lips blue. "Dispatch. This is Cooper." He spoke quickly into his radio, voice trembling despite years of training. "Possible child, unconscious. Alley behind Maple and 5th. Send an ambulance, now." He pulled off his gloves and reached for her wrist. Her skin was like ice. For a second, he thought there was nothing. No pulse, no sign of life. And then faintly, there it was. A slow, fragile rhythm. He exhaled shakily. "Hang in there, kid. We got you." Rex circled the girl once, then did something Daniel had never seen in all his years of service. The dog lowered himself beside her, pressing his body against hers, curling slightly to cover as much of her small frame as possible. His fur darkened with melting snow, but he didn't move. He just lay there, breathing slow, steady, deliberate, sharing warmth. Daniel swallowed hard. "Good boy. Good boy." He unzipped his coat, pulling out an emergency blanket from his belt pouch and spread it over both of them. His hands were shaking as he brushed snow from the girl's face. The beam of his flashlight caught her features, swollen cheeks, small bruises along her jawline, a cut on her lip. Signs no child should ever carry. He looked away, jaw tightening. "Hang in there, sweetheart," he whispered. "You're safe now." Then, a sound. A small, broken voice, barely more than a whisper. "Doggy, don't leave me." Daniel froze. The words barely made it through the wind, but they hit him like a bullet to the heart. He turned back. Her eyelids fluttered open just a little, eyes glazed with exhaustion and fear. Rex lifted his head, ears perked, and made a soft, reassuring sound, halfway between a growl and a whine. He nudged her chin gently with his nose. Her trembling fingers reached up weakly, brushing his fur. The motion was slow, uncertain, like she was testing if this was real. Daniel felt something catch in his chest, a lump in his throat he hadn't felt in years. "It's okay," he murmured. "He's not going anywhere. Neither am I." Her lips parted again. The faintest smile, fragile but real. Then her eyes rolled back, and she went still. "Hey, no, don't do that," Daniel said quickly, shaking her shoulder lightly. "Stay with me. Stay awake." Rex barked once, loud and urgent, as if commanding her to hold on. The sound startled Daniel, and maybe, just maybe, reached her. Her chest rose faintly again. In the distance, the ambulance siren wailed, soft at first, then rising through the storm. Daniel exhaled a long, shaky breath. That's it. Help's coming. He looked down at Rex, who hadn't moved an inch. The dog's fur was dusted white now, his amber eyes locked on the child, unblinking. Daniel whispered, half to himself, "You found her, boy. You saved her." For a long moment, no one moved. Just the snow falling and the faint sound of breathing, human and canine, in rhythm. The kind of silence that feels sacred. Then, the flashing red lights broke through the blizzard. 2 paramedics rushed in, voices loud, professional, cutting through the storm. Daniel stepped back to give them space, but Rex didn't. The shepherd stayed pressed against her side until one of the medics knelt down and gently placed a hand on his back. "It's okay, buddy," the medic said softly. "We'll take it from here." Rex looked up at Daniel for confirmation. "It's okay," Daniel said quietly. "You did your job." The dog hesitated, then slowly stepped aside, but his eyes never left the girl. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, one of her hands remained open, reaching toward where Rex had been. Daniel noticed. So did the dog. Rex took a single step forward and pressed his nose against her fingers, just once, before they carried her away. And for the first time that night, Daniel let out a deep, unsteady breath. The storm still raged. The streets were still empty, but something in the air had changed. A flicker of warmth in the frozen dark. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet understand. A second chance. For her. And maybe for him too. The fluorescent lights of St. Clair Hospital flickered like nervous heartbeats against the sterile white walls. Outside, snow still fell, quiet and unrelenting. A curtain between the world that had broken her and the one now trying to piece her back together. Inside the emergency bay, voices overlapped. BP dropping. "Get me a blanket, she's hypothermic." Bruising pattern inconsistent with a fall. Emily's body looked impossibly small on the stretcher, skin gray-blue, eyelashes frosted, and lips trembling between life and silence. The paramedics wheeled her in, boots squeaking on the cold linoleum floor. Beside them, Rex, the German shepherd, paced restlessly, eyes locked on the girl. He whined softly, his paws leaving faint prints of melted snow. Officer Daniel Cooper followed close behind, breath shallow, heart pounding with the same fear that had haunted him since the radio call. He had seen trauma before, but something about this child, her fragility, the silent terror etched into her, struck deeper than any crime scene could. "Where's her guardian?" Dr. Marianne Blake asked sharply as she cut through Emily's frozen pajamas with surgical scissors. Daniel shook his head. "We're still identifying her. No ID, no records. Just a child left out there." The machines beeped in a steady rhythm, fragile proof of life. Warm air from the heating vents brushed over her small body as nurses wrapped her in thermal blankets. Someone started an IV line. Another checked her vitals. And Daniel stood motionless in the corner, fingers tightening around his badge. Then, a faint sound. A soft, frightened whimper. Emily stirred. Her eyes opened just a slit, pupils unfocused, but wide with fear. She gasped, breath catching, and tried to pull away from the hands that touched her. "No, no, please. I'll be good. I'll be good." Her words, barely audible, pierced through the noise like glass. The nurse froze, her face pale. Daniel stepped forward, lowering his voice to something calm, steady, the kind of tone one uses around a wounded animal. "Hey, hey, you're safe now, sweetheart. Nobody's gonna hurt you." But Emily's panic only grew. Her eyes darted around the room, too bright, too cold, too strange. And then, suddenly, she saw him. At the doorway, blocked by a nurse's hesitant stance, stood Rex, his amber eyes locked on hers. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He simply waited. Emily's breathing slowed. Her trembling fingers reached toward him, a fragile gesture of instinct more than thought. "Doggy," she whispered hoarsely. "Doggy, don't leave me." The nurse turned to Daniel, uncertain. "We can't allow animals in ICU." Daniel's jaw set. "He stays." His tone left no room for debate. For a long moment, silence hung heavy. Then Dr. Blake nodded, just once. "Fine, but if he breaks sterile protocol, you're both out." Daniel gave a grateful nod. He bent down and unclipped Rex's leash. The shepherd trotted forward, tail low, movements gentle as if he somehow understood the fragility before him. He placed his large body beside the bed, nose resting near Emily's hand. And for the first time since they'd found her, she stopped shaking. Her fingers sank into his fur, the warmth grounding her in a way no blanket could. The monitors steadied. The room, filled with hums and beeps, seemed to exhale. Dr. Blake continued her examination. She traced a gloved finger over old scars, faded purple marks along Emily's ribs, wrists, and back. Her voice softened, professional but shaking slightly. Multiple fractures, bruising in various stages of healing, malnutrition, psychological trauma likely severe. The nurse bit her lip. How does someone this small survive that long? Daniel didn't answer. His gaze fell on Emily's face, serene now, her cheek pressed against Rex's fur. "She didn't," he said quietly. "She endured. There's a difference." Hours passed. The snow outside turned from white to gray as morning crept closer. The hallway lights dimmed to night mode, casting long shadows across the floor. Daniel sat in a chair beside the bed, exhaustion written deep beneath his eyes. Rex remained still, alert but calm, a silent guardian. Dr. Blake returned with her report, voice lower this time. "We'll need to involve Child Protective Services. This kind of abuse." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It doesn't come from strangers." Daniel nodded grimly. "We'll find who did this, and we'll make sure they never get near her again." He looked down at Emily, tiny, fragile, breathing in shallow whispers. A small paper bracelet now circled her wrist, labeled Jane Doe. He frowned. "We can't keep calling her that." Dr. Blake smiled faintly. "Then give her a name, until she remembers her own." Daniel thought for a moment, eyes softening. "How about Grace?" Rex's ears twitched at the sound, as if in agreement. "Grace," Dr. Blake repeated, writing it down on the chart. "Fitting. She's still here. That's something close to a miracle." As the doctor left, Daniel leaned closer to the bed, lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for Rex and the sleeping child. "You found her," he murmured. "Now we keep her safe." Rex gave a quiet whine, pressing his head gently against Emily's arm. Outside, the storm eased at last. The first pale rays of dawn slipped through the blinds, laying a soft light across the girl's face. The hospital still smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. But in that room, for the first time, there was something else. Warmth. And the faint, steady rhythm of two hearts. One human, one canine. Beginning to heal, snow still, blanketed the quiet streets of Spring Creek. But something in the town had shifted. The same houses that once gleamed with neighborly perfection now seemed watchful, suspicious. Curtains twitched when police cruisers passed. Whispers followed every siren. Inside his patrol car, Officer Daniel Cooper sat for a long moment outside the Ross residence, staring at the house that had once looked so immaculate. White siding, blue shutters, the illusion of a perfect life. Now yellow crime scene tape fluttered across the porch like a warning from the wind. He exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Beside him, Rex sat upright, muscles tense, eyes locked on the front door. The dog's low growl rumbled like a memory. Daniel finally stepped out, crunching through snow that had half covered the walkway. Each step felt heavier than the last. The door creaked as he entered, and the smell hit him. Old coffee, alcohol, and something else beneath it. Fear soaked into the walls. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam sliced through the dark living room, catching on family photos still hanging perfectly aligned. Victor Hale, the stepfather, stood in nearly every one of them, arm around his wife, hand resting on Emily's shoulder just a little too tight. Daniel's throat tightened. He moved deeper into the house. Rex followed, sniffing the air, tail stiff, hackles barely raised. "Easy, boy," Daniel whispered. "We're just here to listen." They found the first stain near the kitchen table, faint, but unmistakable. Blood. Hidden under a thin layer of varnish. The forensics team had already tagged it, but Daniel crouched beside it anyway, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. A memory flashed. Emily's small body under the snow, her lips blue, her voice barely a whisper. "Doggy, don't leave me." He stood, jaw tightening. "You didn't just hurt her," he muttered to the empty room. "You tried to erase it." Rex gave a low whine and tugged toward the hallway. Daniel followed. The dog led him to a small room at the back of the house. The door had locks on the outside. 3 of them. Heavy metal bolts scratched from years of use. Inside, the air was colder, stiller. A small bed sat in the corner, blanket torn, stuffed bear missing an eye. The wallpaper was peeling where small hands had clawed at it. On the floor lay a notebook, bent, dirty, edges torn. Daniel knelt, picking it up gently. Inside were drawings, crude, childlike, trembling lines drawn with the shaky control of a 10-year-old. A stick figure of a girl behind bars, another with tears streaming down her face. And in several of them, always the same figure, a dog, drawn with big eyes and a round tail, labeled with a single word written in uneven letters, safe. Daniel's breath hitched. He flipped through page after page, some filled with words he could barely read, others just smudges from tears, and then, at the last page, a single sentence barely legible. "When I grow up, I'll live where no one yells. Only dogs bark." He closed the notebook, his throat burning. Outside, the sound of tires crunching on ice broke the silence. Daniel turned as Sandra Hale stepped out of a police vehicle, her wrists cuffed loosely in front of her. Her once carefully styled hair hung in strands, her eyes hollow, her face pale. "Mrs. Hale," Daniel said coldly. She didn't meet his eyes. You don't understand, she murmured, voice shaking. He would have hurt me too. You think I wanted this? You think I could have stopped him? Daniel stared at her, disbelief turning slowly to anger. You were her mother. Her lips quivered. I was scared. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You didn't need to be brave. You just needed to care. She turned away, shoulders trembling, and for a fleeting second, Daniel saw something. Not guilt, but emptiness. A void where love should have been. 2 officers led her inside for questioning. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room at the precinct, Victor Hale sat behind the glass wall, posture relaxed, arrogance radiating like a foul smell. His wrists were cuffed, but he looked unconcerned, almost amused. Daniel entered the room with Rex at his side. The man smirked. You brought your mutt? What, you think he can tell if I'm lying? Daniel said nothing. He placed the notebook on the table. You recognize this? Victor leaned forward, scanning the drawings. Kids make up stories. They bruise themselves. They fall. You people don't know what goes on inside a home. Daniel's jaw clenched. We do now. Victor shrugged. She's a liar, always was, attention seeker. You'll see. The truth never matches the sob story. Rex's growl deepened, a low, primal rumble that filled the small room. His ears pressed flat, teeth barely visible beneath his lip. Daniel didn't stop him. He leaned forward, voice low, calm but shaking with barely contained fury. You talk like that one more time, and I swear you'll see what real truth looks like. For a moment, Victor's smirk faltered, just slightly. Daniel stood, gathering the evidence, photos, notebook, medical reports. He turned toward the one-way mirror, signaling the officers outside. Charge him, he said, with everything we can. As he left the room, he paused at the door. The weight of the house, the stains, the diary, all of it sat heavy in his chest. He looked down at Rex, who was still staring at the door, ears alert. Yeah, Daniel murmured. I know, boy. Monsters look human sometimes. Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft, silent, indifferent. But somewhere across town, in a hospital room lit by morning sun, a small girl slept peacefully for the first time in years. And for Daniel, that was reason enough to keep fighting. The snow had melted from the streets of Spring Creek, but the cold hadn't left. It lingered in the air, in the courthouse hallways, in the hearts of those waiting for justice. Inside courtroom 2B, a hushed tension filled the space. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, pens poised but silent. The audience, a mix of townspeople and strangers drawn by the horror of it all, seemed to breathe as one. At the center sat Emily Ross, now 11, her hair shorter, her frame thinner but steadier. She wore a pale blue dress chosen by her caseworker. In her small hand, she held a leash, and at the other end, lying calmly on the floor, was Rex, her silent guardian. Every time she reached down, her fingers brushed his fur, as if reminding herself she wasn't alone anymore. Across the room, Victor Hale sat at the defense table, wearing the same smug expression he'd carried through every hearing. His suit was pressed, his posture confident, as if he still believed charm could hide the monster within. He didn't look at Emily. He didn't have the courage. Beside him, Sandra Hale sat trembling, tissues piled in her lap. Her tears came too late, like rain after a fire. When the judge entered, the murmurs died instantly. The prosecutor, Rachel Monroe, stood and addressed the court. Her tone was measured but sharp. Your Honor, the people will show that this child endured years of systematic abuse, inflicted by the very man who was meant to protect her, and ignored by the woman who was supposed to love her. Victor scoffed quietly, shaking his head. Then came the moment that froze everyone. Rachel turned to Emily. Emily, she said softly, you can tell the truth now. No one can hurt you anymore. Emily's small hands trembled as she rose. The bailiff guided her to the witness stand. Rex followed until he was stopped by a hesitant security officer. She needs him. Daniel Cooper's voice came from the back of the courtroom. His tone was calm but unyielding. Let the dog stay. The judge glanced at Emily, then nodded. Permission granted. The room exhaled. Emily sat down. Her legs barely reached the edge of the seat. She looked around, at the walls, the people, the weight of so many eyes. Then, slowly, she began. At first, she whispered, he was nice. He brought me toys. He said I had to be good so Mom wouldn't be sad. Her voice trembled. Then one night, I spilled milk. He got angry. Sandra covered her face with shaking hands, sobbing silently. Victor smirked. Lies, he muttered under his breath. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and echoing. Mr. Hale, remain silent. Emily's eyes flicked toward him, that familiar fear creeping back. But Rex shifted beside her, pressing his head gently against her knee. His warmth anchored her. She took a breath. He locked me in my room. I couldn't leave. I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone. I just drew. Rachel approached, holding up Emily's notebook, the same one Daniel had found, behind the locked door. Is this your notebook, Emily? She nodded. Yes, I drew so I wouldn't forget what real felt like. Rachel opened to a page, the picture of a girl and a dog labeled safe. The courtroom fell silent. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with grief. These drawings, Rachel said softly, are not imagination. They are testimony, a child's record of survival. Victor shifted in his seat, jaw tight. The mask of arrogance began to crack. The defense attorney rose weakly. Objection. These are subjective, mere artistic expression. Rachel turned on him. Artistic expression? You call a 10-year-old's depiction of bruises and chains art? The objection fell flat. The judge overruled. Rachel returned to Emily. Do you remember the night you ran away? Emily nodded slowly, eyes distant. It was cold. I thought I would die. But then I heard barking. Her lips curved slightly. Rex found me. Daniel, sitting in the back, swallowed hard. He looked down at Rex, whose ears flicked at the sound of his name. Emily's voice grew softer, steadier. He didn't just find me. He stayed. He didn't leave. For a moment, the courtroom wasn't a place of law, but a place of quiet healing. Rachel placed the notebook on the evidence table. No further questions, Your Honor. The defense attorney tried to cross-examine, but every question seemed to crumble under the weight of Emily's truth. When he asked if she might be confused, she simply shook her head and said, No, monsters don't change their faces. You just learn to stop looking away. The gallery fell silent again. Then a single tear rolled down Sandra's cheek. Hours later, the jury returned. The judge's voice echoed in the stillness. We, the jury, find the defendant, Victor Hale, guilty on all counts. The words hung in the air like the breaking of a spell. Victor's composure shattered. He slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "You think this is justice?" But no one listened. Sandra sobbed uncontrollably. Daniel stood quietly near the door, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. At the witness stand, Emily's shoulders trembled. Then she exhaled, a breath years in the making. She leaned down, pressed her forehead gently to Rex's, and whispered, barely audible but clear enough for the world to hear, "We did it, Rex." The German shepherd's tail thumped softly against the floor. Once, twice, like a heartbeat returning after a long winter. The gavel struck. The case was closed. Outside, sunlight spilled through the courthouse steps, touching Emily's face as she walked out, Rex trotting beside her. She didn't look back. The monster was gone. And for the first time, the little girl who once prayed for dogs to guard heaven finally felt safe, because one already had. The winter sun was pale, filtered through the thin curtains of the small, cozy house. Outside, frost clung to the window edges like fragile lace, but inside, warmth lived again. The faint hum of the heater, the smell of cocoa, the quiet creak of wooden floors, all whispered a kind of peace Emily had never known. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her from a distance. She sat cross-legged on the living room rug, her hair loose and soft now, her little fingers tracing the pages of a picture book. Beside her, Rex lay like a dark furred guardian, his head resting on her lap. Every so often, he would glance up at her with eyes that seemed to ask, "Are you safe now?" For months, that question had been answered not in words, but in the soft, trembling breaths Emily took each night as she learned how to sleep without fear. But sometimes, fear still came. Daniel would wake to the sound of muffled whimpers down the hallway. He'd find her twisted in her blanket, face wet with tears, whispering the name she no longer dared to speak. Victor. Rex would already be there, his paw resting gently on her hand, a silent promise that monsters wouldn't find her here. Tonight was one of those nights. Her small body jolted awake, heart pounding. The hospital lights from her dream, those long, cold, white lights, still flickered behind her eyelids. She remembered them from the day she was rescued. The doctors leaning over her. The sterile smell. The endless questions. The hospital of cold lights, she called it. The place where pain was treated, but never truly healed. Daniel hurried in, his voice low and steady. Hey, you're okay," he murmured, kneeling beside her bed. "You're safe, Emily. You're home." Her eyes darted around the darkened room, searching for shadows that weren't there. And then, Rex climbed up, slow and gentle, curling himself beside her. The steady rhythm of his breathing filled the silence. Emily's fingers gripped his collar, grounding herself in the warmth of his fur. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. "Want me to read you something?" She nodded. He reached for the book that had become their ritual. Brave Hearts and Loyal Paws. His voice softened as he began. "Once there was a dog who guarded a child through every storm. He never left, not even when the world turned dark. Because love once found never truly leaves." Her eyes fluttered, heavy with sleep but calm now. "Will you ever leave me?" she whispered. Daniel froze for a moment. the question cutting through him like glass. He looked at Rex, the same dog who had saved her, who had barked through hell to bring her back. Then he smiled, a small, quiet smile that reached his eyes. "No," he said softly. "Neither of us will." Her lips curved in the faintest smile, fragile, hopeful. She nestled closer to Rex, who licked her hand once before settling his head near her pillow. Daniel stayed there even after she drifted off, watching the rise and fall of her chest. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that, maybe, just maybe, the world could be kind again. The room glowed in the faint amber of the nightlight. On the nightstand sat a framed photo, taken just a week ago, of the three of them at the park. Emily was laughing, mid-swing, her arms outstretched toward the sky. Daniel was pushing her gently, and Rex stood guard beneath, tail wagging like he finally believed the fight was over. But in the quiet of that night, Daniel's thoughts wandered. He thought of the trial, of the things that could never be undone. He thought of the look on Victor's face when the verdict was read, the fleeting, venomous hate that would haunt Daniel for years. And then he thought of Sandra, broken, trembling, trapped in her own prison of guilt. He exhaled. The world wasn't fair, but at least now, for one child, it was safe. He rose to his feet and turned off the bedside lamp. The room dimmed to a soft twilight. As he stepped toward the door, Rex's eyes followed him. The silent exchange between man and dog carried something words couldn't. Gratitude, respect, and the unspoken pact they'd made. Protect her, no matter what. Downstairs, Daniel paused by the window. The night was still. Snow had begun to fall, slow, lazy flakes catching the glow of the porch light. It was quiet, almost sacred. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the same way he had every night since Emily came home. But tonight, he smiled as he noticed something new, a crayon drawing taped to the fridge. It showed three figures, a girl with pigtails, a tall man with a badge, and a big brown dog with a heart on his chest. Beneath them, in wobbly letters, Emily had written, "My family." Daniel stood there for a long time, staring at it. His throat tightened. All the sleepless nights, the paperwork, the therapy sessions, the whispered reassurances, it had led to this. A child's drawing that said home. Upstairs, Rex stirred softly, his ears twitching at the faint sound of the wind outside. Emily murmured in her sleep, and he pressed closer to her. For the first time since the hospital of cold lights, she didn't wake up crying. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt that he wasn't just saving others, he was saving himself. Tomorrow, they would go to the park again. Emily would run with Rex across the open field, laughing as he chased the falling leaves. Daniel would sit on the bench, watching them, and for a fleeting moment, the ghosts of the past would fade in the sunlight. Because sometimes, healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes quietly, in small rooms under soft blankets, beside loyal dogs who never stop believing that love can be rebuilt. And on that cold winter night, in a house filled with warmth and second chances, the world, at least their small corner of it, was finally right again. The morning air was sharp and bright, carrying with it the faint scent of snow. The town square shimmered beneath a pale winter sun, banners fluttering in the chill breeze. It was a day of honor, but for Emily, it felt like something more. The day she would finally say goodbye to the shadows that had once ruled her world. Cameras lined the edges of the crowd. Reporters adjusted their mics, flashes popped, and murmurs rippled through the gathered townsfolk. At the center of it all stood a small stage draped in blue and white cloth. On it, a gleaming medal, engraved with words she couldn't yet read fully, but understood deep down. For bravery beyond measure. Daniel adjusted his tie awkwardly beside her. He had never been one for ceremonies, but as he looked down at Emily, dressed in her little gray coat and knitted scarf, clutching Rex's leash tightly in both hands, he realized this wasn't just about formality. It was about closing a circle that had begun in pain and was ending, at last, in peace. The mayor took the podium, his voice echoing through the crisp air. Today we honor a hero, not one of uniform, but one of heart. A dog whose courage and loyalty saved a life and reminded us all what unconditional love truly looks like. The crowd applauded softly, reverently. Rex stood tall beside Emily, fur brushed, chest puffed out slightly, as if he somehow understood the importance of the moment. Cameras clicked rapidly, but Emily barely noticed. Her hand rested gently on his head, fingers threading through his fur, the same way she had done in her darkest moments. When her name was called, Daniel gave her a reassuring nod. "Go on," he whispered. "You've got this." Emily hesitated at first. The crowd, the flashing lights, it was overwhelming. But Rex took a single step forward, his leash tugging gently as if to say, "I'm here." She took a deep breath, then followed. The audience fell silent as she climbed the few wooden steps. The mayor smiled warmly and knelt to her level, holding out the small box containing the medal. "This belongs to your friend," he said softly. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, the silver medal gleamed, polished and pure, reflecting her small face and the endless winter sky above. She knelt beside Rex, eyes brimming. "You did it," she whispered. Her voice shook, but not from fear, from awe. Carefully, she placed the medal around his neck, the ribbon brushing against his fur. The crowd erupted into applause. Rex's tail thumped once against the stage floor, and for a brief, beautiful moment, he lifted his head, eyes meeting Emily's, and licked her cheek. The audience melted. Even Daniel had to blink away the moisture gathering in his eyes. Flashes went off again. Cameras captured that single, perfect instant. The girl and the dog who had saved each other. A snowflake drifted down from the gray clouds above, landing softly on Emily's open hand. She watched it melt slowly against her skin, feeling the chill seep into her palm. Months ago, that same cold had meant fear. Hospital lights, sterile rooms, questions she couldn't answer. But now it felt clean, peaceful, like the world was new again. She looked up at Daniel, who smiled at her from the crowd. And she smiled back, not shyly this time, but with quiet confidence. The mayor continued his speech, recounting Rex's bravery, how his bark led rescuers to the hidden cellar, how he refused to leave Emily's side even when medics tried to take her away. Each word painted a story that sounded too incredible to be real, yet everyone who saw them knew it was. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he stepped to the microphone, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Rex didn't just save Emily's life," he said. "He saved mine too. He reminded me why we do what we do, why we protect, why we fight, why we never give up on the innocent. He looked at Emily then, his tone softening. And sometimes, heroes wear badges, but sometimes they wear fur. Laughter and applause filled the square. Emily turned to Rex, whispering, "Did you hear that? You're a hero." He wagged his tail, panting lightly, the metal glinting against his chest. Later, as the ceremony ended, people approached to take pictures. Children reached out to pet Rex. Adults thanked Daniel for his service. But Emily stayed close to her guardian and her dog, her eyes drinking in everything. The sunlight glinting off snow, the laughter, the peace. A reporter knelt beside her, microphone extended. "Emily," she asked gently, "how does it feel to see Rex honored today?" Emily hesitated, her cheeks pink. Then she looked down at Rex, who tilted his head expectantly. Her small voice rose, clear and sincere. "It feels like he finally knows what I always did, that he's my angel." The reporter smiled softly. "That's beautiful." As they left the stage, Daniel slipped his coat around her shoulders. "You did great up there," he said. She leaned into him, holding Rex's leash close. "I wasn't scared," she whispered. "Not this time." Daniel's throat tightened. "No," he said, smiling through it. "You were brave, just like him." They walked together through the square, leaving behind the cheers and applause. The snow had begun to fall heavier now, gentle flakes swirling in the soft wind. The three of them, man, girl, and dog, moved as one silhouette against the pale white light. And as they reached the park, Emily stopped. She looked at the sky, hand outstretched again. A single snowflake landed on her palm. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she smiled. A real, radiant smile. Her voice, quiet but sure, broke the silence. "Some angels have wings," she whispered. "Others have fur." Daniel looked down at her, then at Rex. The dog lifted his head toward the sky, nose twitching, as if he too understood. And under that endless winter sky, cold, vast, and impossibly bright, a little girl finally found her forever home. Sometimes, the purest kind of love doesn't come from words at all. It comes from a heartbeat beside us, a pair of loyal eyes that never judge, and a gentle paw resting on our hand when we need it most. German shepherds, like Rex, remind us that courage and loyalty aren't taught. They're felt. They protect not because they have to, but because their hearts are built that way. If this story touched you, maybe it's a good time to give your own dog an extra hug tonight. Or even learn a little more about how to understand what they're trying to tell you. I recently found a beautiful little resource about deepening the bond between people and their dogs, and it truly changed how I see them. You can check it out if you'd like. It's something special. Thank you for being here, for believing in kindness, and for loving animals the way you do. Because at the end of the day, they don't just share our homes, they heal our hearts.